Bright Tuty. Every student matters.
Hi students, in this session we are going to talk about other types of nutrition or other modes of nutrition that we see in the plants. When we were talking about modes of nutrition, we had talked about autotrophic as well as heterotrophic nutrition. We've already seen that how plants undergo autotrophic nutrition. We've seen the process of photosynthesis and how does it occur. Now let's talk about other modes of nutrition in plants. Usually these kinds of modes are seen in the plants which are non-green. That means they do not have chlorophyll, right? And this is the reason why they are not able to produce their own food. When we were talking about photosynthesis, we saw that chlorophyll was an essential part of this whole photosynthesis process, because chlorophyll was the pigment which captured the sunlight, and with the help of this energy, the food was synthesized. But in the case of these plants, these plants do not have chlorophyll, and this is the reason why they are dependent on other plants for their nutrition. And such kind of plants are known as the heterotrophs, right? These are known as what? These are known as the heterotrophic plants, right? So when we talk about the heterotrophs, there are basically two types that we see. One is the parasitic mode and other is the insectivorous. We are going to talk about both of these types in detail, right? Now let's move on and talk about the parasitic mode of nutrition. I'm pretty sure you must have seen this kind of yellow, wiry branched structures on different plants. These are very common structures, and you will find, suppose this is the tree as you can see, and you will find that these structures are present on the upper parts of these trees. These structures are actually plants called as the cuscuta, and these plants are parasitic. What does this term means? Let's understand that. These plants do not have chlorophyll. As you can see, these are yellowish colored plants, right? So these plants are yellowish, and what is the important thing is that they lack chlorophyll, right? Because of absence of chlorophyll, what happens is that these plants are not able to synthesize their food. So what do they do? Now you must have seen these plants on green, these yellowish plants called as the cuscuta on the green plants. What happens is that these plants take up the ready-made food from the plant. We know that the green plants are able to synthesize their own food. So these plants, as you can see, this is known as the Hosteria of cuscuta. That means from these parts, cuscuta has these parts known as Hosteria, and these Hosteria actually take up the food that is made by the plant, right? So these plants are first of all yellowish. Then what else they do is they take up the ready-made food from the plants, right? From whichever plants it is climbing. As you can see that this plant is again, it resembles climbers, because these plants again do not have an upright stem, right? So these plants actually climb an actual healthy tree, right? Green tree or green plant. And from that green plant, what it does is it takes up the ready-made food. Now if you think, now as you can see that how much it has covered the whole tree, right? So basically what is happening over here is that as cuscuta grows, right, it keeps on growing onto the plant, and what it does is it deprives the plant from the food, right? So what it does is it deprives the plant of the food. So whatever food is being made by this plant is taken up by cuscuta, and the reason is, and because of this reason, the food is not, the food that the plant is making is not being utilized by its own body, right? So because of this, what is happening, the plant slowly dies, right? And such kind of plants which are getting harmed from these cuscuta plants are called as the host, right? So over here, this plant is the host, right? Right, students? So as you can see that how this is a dangerous plant, right? And definitely the reason is that it doesn't have chlorophyll, so it depends on the other plants. And this mode of nutrition where the host is deprived of the nutrition and because of that the body of the host is harmed is called as the parasitic nutrition. Parasites are those organisms which depend on other organisms for their food, and in turn they harm the other organism, right? So suppose there is an organism A and there is an organism B. So B is dependent on A for the food, and in turn it is also harming the plant A, right? So what is happening over here? This particular plant is called as the parasite, whereas this plant is called as the host, right? So over here this plant is the host and this Cuscuta is the parasite, right? So parasite actually harms the body of their host. Now over here you might think that we and other organisms are also taking up food from the plants. We are also taking up the food from different animals. So are we also parasites? So for this question, I'm pretty sure your teachers would have answers. Please discuss it with them. And over here, I will give you an insight that parasites are totally dependent on this. They get attached to the body of the host. One thing. And we do not act as parasite because we do not harm the organism, right? What we are talking about here is that when we are taking up food, we are eating the food, we are not acting parasitically, whereas these organisms definitely act as parasites. So this is the Cuscuta plant which acts as a parasite. What it does, it takes up the ready-made food from the plant and it deprives the plant from the food, and thus the plants, the body of the plants decline. There is another type of plant which is again a non-green plant. This plant is called as the broomrape. This plant, the speciality of this particular plant is that again, as you can see, it is non-green and it gets attached to the food, to the roots, especially the roots which store food. Like as you can see, it is attached to a carrot, right? So what it does is it gets attached to the vegetables like carrot, radish, and what it does is it takes up nutrition from these areas, and for this very reason they do not need the autotrophic mode of nutrition, plus they do not have chlorophyll, and that's why they derive their food in this way, right? So these were the two examples of the parasitic plants. One was Cuscuta and other was broomrape, right? Now next type of nutrition that we are going to look at is a very interesting nutrition. You must have heard about some of the plants which are able to digest other organisms, other animals, right? So what are these plants? Have you ever seen these plants which can eat other animals? Over here, students, I would like to correct this statement because these are not animals, these are the insects which these plants consume. These are known as the insectivorous plants. Now, this is a very interesting type of plant that we find in our environment. Let's talk about this plant and let's understand how does this happen, because it's quite fascinating. We've all been studying about the animals which hunt for survival. But over here we are seeing that the plants are trapping insects for their food. So these are the two examples, that is the Cuscuta and the broomrape. Now Paheli has a question. She wants to know whether mosquitoes, bed bugs, lice and leeches that suck our blood are also parasites. So definitely, students, these are also known as the parasites because they depend on us for the survival, and they actually cause harm to our body. When the mosquito sucks blood from our body, it actually transfers diseases like malaria and dengue. When the bed bugs, they bite us and they suck our blood, they cause the diseases like skin rashes and so on. So these organisms definitely are the parasites, and because of these parasites we are getting harmed. So we are the host and these are the parasites, right? Now, moving on to a very interesting plant called as the insectivorous plants. You must have heard about these plants. These are the plants which actually feed on the insects. Now, let's talk about these plants and understand them. One of the major plants which we all know and we've heard about is the pitcher plant. Now, as the name suggests, this plant actually forms a pitcher from its leaf. Now, as you can see, this is a pitcher plant. Over here, you can see it's very interesting and it has a structure which looks like a pitcher and hence the name. What happens in this plant is, first of all, let's understand that from where does this pitcher actually comes and how this plant captures the insect. This pitcher-like or jug-like structure is actually a modified leaf, right? So this is a very interesting modification which happens in this particular plant, and this jug-like structure is nothing but a modified leaf. And apart from that, this leaf actually has a lid on it, right? So this is a jug-like structure with a lid. So this lid is what? It is an apex. This lid is the apex of the leaf, right? So this is the modification. The leaf has been modified as the jug, and the apex of the leaf has been modified as the lid. Now, what is the function of the lid and how does this jug or the pitcher helps in the capturing of the insectivorous plants? Let's understand. So how the modification of the leaf as jugs and the apex as the lid helps in capturing of the insects. Let's understand that. First of all, in this pitcher, there are, suppose this is the body of the pitcher, there are hairs which are facing downwards like this, right? And the apex is such that, this lid is such that it can close as well as it can open. Over here you can see that it is in open state and over here it is in closed state, right? So first thing is that the very important modification is that the lid, right, can be closed and can be opened, right? It is open when there is no insect inside the pitcher and it gets closed as soon as an insect enters the pitcher. Apart from that, there are hairs which are pointing downwards. Now this, what is the purpose of the hair which are facing downwards is that when the insect comes, suppose this is a bug, right? When it comes inside the pitcher, it helps, these hair actually helps in moving the bug down. But when the bug tries to come up, these downward facing hairs blocks its movement, right? So these hair do not allow the bug to move out of the jug. Apart from that, when the bugs enter, right, when the bug enters, the lid is closed, right? So the lid gets closed and the bug gets trapped inside this pitcher plant, right? Once the bugs goes inside the pitcher, it gets entangled in this hair, right? They block the upward movement of the insect, and what is released over here is the digestive juices, right? Now these digestive juices, contains the enzymes which these digestive enzymes consume or they digest this bug, and it absorbs, the plant absorbs the nutrients from this bug, right? So in this way the insects is being utilized by these plants, and hence these are known as the insectivorous plants because they feed on the insect, right? So in this way we see that how the pitcher plant works. This is another example of an insectivorous plant. It is called as the Venus flytrap, right? So as you can see, this is also the modification of a leaf wherein the trap is opened, and as soon as the insect lands on the trap, it gets closed, right? And again the digestive juices are released and the insects get digested and the nutrients are absorbed. Now if you notice, and this is something which Bujo also noticed, and that's the reason why he's asking a question. Bujo is confused. If the pitcher plant is green and carries out photosynthesis, then why does it feed on an insect? Now, moving back to the picture, if you look at this particular plant, this plant is also green. Over here, you can see the leaves of the pitcher plant also as green. So, what does this indicate? That these plants are actually performing photosynthesis. But you may wonder, and as rightly Gujo is also wondering, that if they are able to perform photosynthesis, why do they need to feed on the insects? Because we have already learned that plants which are not green, which are non-green, are the ones which feed on the insects, not the plants which are green. Over here, this is an exception. The reason is that these plants grow in nitrogen deficient soil. Nitrogen deficient soil, right? Because of this reason, what happens is that these plants have to depend on the insect to fulfill their nitrogen requirement. We've already studied that how the green plants also require nitrogen, right? Similarly, we see that these plants also require nitrogen, but because the soil is nitrogen deficient, that means the amount of nitrogen in the soil is pretty less, and this is the reason why the pitcher plant shows this kind of modification and has developed as an insectivorous plants, right? So I hope you were able to understand these two types of mode of nutrition in the plants. One is the parasitic mode and other is the insectivorous mode, wherein in the parasitic, the plant which was non-green dependent on the host plant completely, and it deprived the host plant of nutrition and caused harm to the body. On the other side, we had insectivorous plants which were green in color, and they were able to do photosynthesis but still depending on the insects to fulfill their nitrogen requirements. These are the organisms which actually feed on the dead and decaying matter. And how does this happen? What are the different types of organisms which actually go through with this kind of mode of nutrition? We are going to talk about that. But before that, I would like to ask you a question that all of you must have seen mushroom. Many times we bring mushroom from the markets, we buy them and it is sold in packets. During the rainy seasons, you must have seen these kind of growth on the decaying matters as well, right? So you must wonder, from where do these organisms actually obtain their food? So over here also you can see the organisms, the mushrooms growing on a decaying matter, right? So a question must arise in your mind that from where do these organisms get their food to survive? Similar question is in the mind of Gujo. He wants to know how these organisms acquire nutrients. They do not have mouths like animals do. They are not like green plants as they lack chlorophyll and cannot make food by photosynthesis. So it's a very different kind of organism wherein it doesn't have mouths like we do or other animals do. Neither are these organisms green, so they cannot do photosynthesis as well. So to understand that how do these organisms obtain their food, let's perform a simple activity.
To observe bread mold or fungus. Materials required: a piece of bread, water, glass slide, cover slip, forceps, glycerin, microscope. Procedure: thoroughly moisten the piece of bread with water. Keep the piece of bread in air for a day or two. Then keep the piece of bread for 3 to 4 more days in a warm place. After 3 to 4 days, you find that the bread gets covered with grayish-white patches. Take 1 to 2 drops of glycerin on a glass slide and put a few fragments of greyish patch on it. Observation. You see tiny black rounded structures growing on thin long stalks from the bread. Conclusion. The greyish white patches on the piece of bread are bread mold or rhizopus, that is, a fungus.
What you're going to do in this activity and what you need is a bread, right? So take this bread, students, and moisten it and keep it in the warm environment. Keep it for some time and you will observe after some time that there is a fluffy patches that are appearing on the bread. It would look something like that. Usually it is greenish in color, right? So you will look at the fluffy patches that are there on the bread. When you take this particular piece, right, this particular piece or any piece that is green and observe it under microscope, you will find this kind of growth. What you are going to find is you are going to observe it under the microscope and you are going to find cotton-like threads that are spread on the surface of the bread. Right? So this is something which you are going to observe, that this is the bread surface and there will be thread like this, cotton-like thread which is spread onto the surface, right? These organisms which you are seeing are known as the fungi, right? And the mushroom that we were talking about also belongs to this particular category, right? So fungi are the organisms which are usually found growing on the dead and decaying matter, right? As you can see, like we said that the fungi was actually growing on the decaying wood, right? So this is a mushroom, and mushroom, like I said, is a fungi. So it is usually growing on the dead and decaying matter. So the mode of nutrition that they show is quite different, because what they do is they absorb the nutrients from the bread. Absorb the nutrients. We were looking at the different modes, that is the autotrophic and the heterotrophic mode, and we saw there that the organisms were either making their own food or they were eating the food with the help of their mouths. But in this case, the food is being absorbed, right? So the mode of nutrition in which the nutrient is obtained, the nutrient is taken in from the dead and decaying matter is called as saprotrophs, right? So saprotrophic nutrition is a nutrition where the organism are feeding on the dead and decaying matter, right? So please remember this definition. It's a very important point. Let me just write it down again for you so that you are able to remember. So the mode of nutrition in which organisms take in nutrients from the dead and decaying matter is known as saprophytic nutrition, right? So wherever you will find that there is dead and decaying matter, you will find that there is presence of fungi. So the example for this is fungi, right? And the example of fungi is, one of the examples is mushrooms, right? So in this way, we see that the mode of nutrition where the organisms depend on the dead and decaying matter, And how do they obtain it? They absorb the nutrients from that matter. Like when these fungus is growing onto the bread, what it is doing is it is absorbing the nutrients from the bread, right? So in this way, the saprophytic nutrition takes place. Now, you must have seen these fungi growing on you must have seen this fungus growing on pickles, also leather, right? Where else you will find it on clothes as well, on different kinds of food materials also. So what actually fungi does is it's actually when it is seen on these food materials, the food materials get ruined, right? So fungi, when they are growing, whenever these types of things are left outside in the environment which is hot and humid, right? So there's a little moisture and it's really hot. What happens is that the fungus starts growing over there and spoils these things, right? So now the thing to understand is, you might wonder that from where do these fungi come? That is what Paheli is also wondering, that Paheli is keen to know whether her beautiful shoes which she wore on special occasions were spoiled by fungi during the rainy season. She wants to know how fungi appear suddenly during the rainy season. So this is a very valid question, students. You must have seen that this kind of fungal growth is not seen on breads or any other food material during the winter season. It is usually seen during the rainy season when the environment is humid, right? And definitely the beautiful shoes that she might be wearing might have been spoiled by fungal growth, fungal spread also. So the question that she's asking is that from where do these fungus appear suddenly? So let's understand her question. Let's answer her question. So what happens is that these fungi produces spores, right? So these spores are usually always floating. These are always present in the air, right? The fungal spores are they are floating in the air, and as soon as they land on any surface, suppose spores land on the bread, right? Now what happens is that once they land on the bread, and the atmosphere is humid, that means it has moisture as well as it is hot. So what will happen, that these spores will find favorable environment and they will start to germinate. These spores result in the formation of the fungal growth, right? So in this way we see that how the fungus actually spreads very easily, and especially during the rainy season, because during the rainy season we see that the environment is humid as well as it is hot, right? So because of this particular reason, we observe that the spores are growing, the spores usually grow easily and they germinate easily, and that's why we see that during the rainy season our clothes also, we can find fungal growth on our clothes, on our food materials and so on, right? So in this way we see that how the spores are responsible for the fungal growth on different surfaces. Now, Bujo says once his grandfather told him that his wheat fields were spoiled by fungus. He wants to know if fungi also causes disease. So definitely he is right, and not only in the plants, but fungus also causes disease in animals as well. But there are certain fungus which are useful as well. These are yeast and mushrooms, right? This yeast and mushroom is something which is utilized in our food industry. First of all, mushroom is something that we all consume, we eat, and yeast is something which is used in the bakery industry, right? But few of the fungus are such that they cause diseases in plants, animals, is also in humans, right? And some of the fungi are so useful that we also get medicines from them. So there are two sides of two ways in which the fungus is. One way is that it is beneficial for us by producing medicines, right? Also, it acts as food for us, right? Then apart from that, it also causes diseases. So some of the fungi cause disease, and that's why they are dangerous as well. So we see that how these organisms are acting both as beneficial as well as they are posing a threat to us, right?